In American courtrooms, we place extraordinary trust in forensic science. We believe that evidence collected and analyzed by experts will reveal the truth. But what happens when that science is a lie? This is Case Files Explained. I'm your host. Tonight, we examine a case that exposes one of the most dangerous frauds in modern forensic history, and a man who nearly paid for it with his life. The case of Jimmie Duncan. 27 years on death row. For a crime that never happened. In 1998, a Louisiana jury sentenced Jimmie Chris Duncan to die. The evidence against him seemed damning. Forensic experts testified that bite marks on a child's body matched Duncan's teeth exactly. But there was something the jury never saw. A videotape. On that tape, one of the forensic analysts did something that would remain hidden for decades. He took a mold of Duncan's teeth, and he pressed that mold into the child's body, creating the very bite marks he would later match to Duncan in court. The forensic expert manufactured evidence. He created marks on a dead child's body. Then he testified under oath that those marks proved Duncan was a killer. This is the story of how junk science and forensic fraud sent an innocent man to death row for nearly 3 decades, and why the state of Louisiana still wants to execute him. To understand how this happened, we need to understand bite mark evidence. For decades, forensic odontology, the study of teeth in legal cases, was treated as settled science. The premise seemed logical. Every person's teeth are unique, like fingerprints. When someone bites down on skin, they leave a distinctive pattern. Match the pattern to a suspect's teeth, and you have your perpetrator. Courts accepted bite mark testimony. Juries believed it. Prosecutors used it to secure convictions, including death sentences. The science seemed irrefutable. There was just one problem. The science was never actually validated. Studies would eventually show that forensic dentists cannot reliably match bite marks to individuals. Human skin is elastic. Bite marks distort almost immediately. They change shape as tissue swells. They look different depending on the angle of photography or the lighting used. Research has now established that bite mark evidence has contributed to at least 34 wrongful convictions in the United States. 34 people convicted on evidence that scientists now call unreliable. But in 1998, none of this was widely known. Bite mark evidence still carried the weight of established forensic science, and in Louisiana, 2 men had built careers on that supposed expertise, Dr. Michael West and Dr. Stephen Hayne. Their names would eventually become synonymous with forensic fraud, but in the late 1990s, prosecutors treated them as star witnesses. West and Hayne would eventually be linked to at least 9 other wrongful convictions. Their testimony helped send innocent people to prison, some to death row. The case that brought them to Jimmie Duncan began in rural Louisiana, a tragedy that would become a miscarriage of justice spanning nearly 3 decades. A child named Haley Olivo died. Investigators initially suspected foul play. They called in forensic experts to examine the body. What happened next would destroy Jimmie Duncan's life. Dr. Michael West examined Haley's body. He claimed to find bite marks. Then he did something unthinkable. West took an impression of Duncan's teeth, creating a plaster mold of his dental pattern. Standard procedure for comparison purposes, but West had other plans. According to evidence that emerged decades later, West pressed that mold into Haley's body. He created marks using Duncan's dental impression. Then he photographed those marks as evidence. At trial, West testified that the bite marks on Haley's body matched Jimmie Duncan's teeth. He presented his photographs. He offered his expert opinion. The jury believed him. Duncan's conviction rested entirely on this bite mark evidence. There was no other physical evidence linking him to the crime. No eyewitnesses. No confession. just the word of a forensic expert. In 1998, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Jimmie Chris Duncan was sentenced to death. He was transported to Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, to await execution. Duncan maintained his innocence. From his cell on death row, he insisted he had not killed Haley. He said the bite marks were lies. Nobody listened. Years passed. Duncan remained on death row. 20 years. 25 years. His appeals failed. The forensic evidence seemed unimpeachable. But outside prison walls, the science of bite mark evidence was crumbling. Study after study showed its fundamental unreliability. Convictions based on bite marks began to be overturned. Investigators began looking more closely at the cases of West and Hayne. Their testimony had secured numerous convictions. How many were based on fabricated evidence? The Innocence Project took up Duncan's case. Their investigators obtained something that had never been shown to the jury: a videotape of Dr. West's examination. The tape showed West examining Haley's body, and it showed something else. Something damning. West using Duncan's dental mold, pressing it into the child's skin. The bite marks that convicted Jimmie Duncan weren't bite marks at all. They were impressions created by the forensic analyst himself, manufacturing evidence, creating proof where none existed. Duncan's jury in 1998 never saw this videotape. They convicted him without knowing the evidence against him was fabricated by the very expert testifying against him. Armed with this evidence, Duncan's attorneys filed new appeals. They argued that the bite mark evidence was not merely unreliable, it was fraudulent, created by the expert himself. But there was more. New scientific and testimonial evidence emerged suggesting that Haley's death wasn't murder at all. It was a tragic accident. The court reviewed the evidence. All of it. The videotape. The discredited science. The new testimony about the circumstances of Haley's death. In May 2025, Judge Alvin Sharp issued his ruling. He found that clear and convincing evidence proves Jimmie Duncan is factually innocent, not just wrongfully convicted. Factually innocent. The court's finding was unequivocal. Quote, "The evidence shows he is factually innocent of a crime that never occurred. The murder conviction was vacated. A crime that never occurred." Those words carry enormous weight. The court didn't just find procedural errors. It found that Jimmie Duncan spent 27 years on death row for something that didn't happen. On November 26, 2025, Jimmie Chris Duncan walked out of Angola prison after 27 years on death row. Free man, at least temporarily. He had entered Angola as a young man. He emerged in his 50s. More than a quarter century of his life taken by fraudulent evidence and junk science. The Innocence Project called it a vindication. Their years of work had exposed the truth. But the celebration would be short-lived. The state of Louisiana made a decision that shocked many observers. Despite the factual innocence finding, despite the video evidence of fraud, the state appealed. Louisiana is asking the state Supreme Court to overturn the factual innocence ruling. They want to put Jimmie Duncan back on death row. They want to proceed with his execution. The case will be heard by the Louisiana Supreme Court in early 2026. The justices will decide whether a man proven innocent can be returned to death row. For now, Duncan remains free on bail, but the state's appeal means he cannot rebuild his life. The threat of execution still hangs over him. This raises a fundamental question about our justice system. What is the purpose of proving innocence if the state can simply reject that finding and pursue execution anyway? Louisiana's position has drawn criticism from legal scholars and justice advocates nationwide. How can a state justify pursuing the death penalty for someone a judge found factually innocent? The state argues that procedural finality matters, that verdicts must be respected, that reopening cases based on new evidence undermines the legal system. Critics counter that executing an innocent person is the ultimate failure of justice, that no procedural interest can outweigh a human life, especially when innocence has been proven. The Duncan case has become a flashpoint in the debate over forensic science reform. It demonstrates how discredited evidence can persist in the legal system for decades. Bite mark evidence continues to be used in some courtrooms despite its scientific rejection. Standards for forensic testimony vary widely between states. The forensic analysts in this case, West and Hayne, were able to testify as experts for years. Their credentials were rarely challenged. Their methods were rarely questioned. West and Hayne's testimony contributed to at least 9 other wrongful convictions beyond Duncan's case. 9 other people whose lives were upended by discredited forensic evidence. The problem extends beyond these 2 men. The legal system created conditions that allowed forensic fraud to flourish: insufficient oversight, inadequate challenges, blind trust in expert credentials. Defense attorneys often lack resources to challenge forensic evidence. Public defenders carry enormous caseloads. Hiring independent experts costs money most defendants don't have. Prosecutors, meanwhile, have access to state forensic laboratories and expert witnesses. The imbalance creates conditions where bad science can go unchallenged. Organizations like the Innocence Project have documented patterns of forensic failures. Hair analysis, fiber evidence, blood spatter interpretation, all have been shown to be less reliable than once claimed. A 2009 National Academy of Sciences report found that most forensic disciplines lacked scientific validation. Only DNA evidence met rigorous scientific standards. Despite these findings, courts have been slow to exclude unreliable forensic evidence. Judges defer to precedent. Prosecutors resist changes that could undermine past convictions. The Duncan case shows what happens when the system fails completely. Fabricated evidence, fraudulent testimony, an innocent man condemned to die. For 27 years, Duncan lived under a death sentence. Every appeal denied, every claim rejected. The system that was supposed to protect the innocent instead nearly killed him. Duncan's case also raises questions about Haley Olivo. If her death was an accident, not a murder, then the rush to assign blame led investigators away from the truth. The families affected by wrongful convictions suffer multiple tragedies. Victims' families denied closure. Defendants' families watching their loved ones disappear into the system. When the truth finally emerges, there are no winners. Only survivors of a system that failed everyone it was supposed to serve. Understanding the flaws in forensic evidence matters for everyone. As jurors, we may someday be asked to evaluate expert testimony. Knowing its limitations could save an innocent life. Bite mark evidence has been scientifically discredited. If you ever encounter it in a courtroom, understand that research shows forensic dentists cannot reliably match marks to individuals. Question the certainty of expert witnesses. Real scientists acknowledge limitations. Experts who claim absolute certainty, especially in pattern-matching disciplines, should face scrutiny. Support organizations working to reform forensic science standards. The Innocence Project, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and academic forensic science programs all work to eliminate junk science. Follow the Louisiana Supreme Court's decision in early 2026. The ruling could set precedent for how states must respond when factual innocence is proven. Contact your state representatives about forensic science reform. Many states still allow discredited evidence types. Legislative pressure can change outdated evidentiary standards. 27 years. That's what fraudulent forensic evidence cost Jimmie Duncan. 27 years of his life, confined to death row for a crime a judge now says never happened.